Welcome to History Date Night, a World War II podcast covering the Second World War in chronological order, from the opening shots to final victory. I'm Justin, and joining me is my wife and co-host, Jenny. Together we explore the people, battles, and turning points that shape the deadliest conflict in human history, one date at a time. On this episode,
knocking out 2 tanks outright,
which is crazy.
It's a partial success,
which is also crazy.
Welcome back to History Date Night. I'm Jenny. Last episode, Allied troops finally landed in Norway in real numbers and immediately ran into issues like skis without bindings, missing anti-aircraft guns, and a war fought largely by improvisation on both sides. This episode, April 21st through 26th, that improvisation collides with a well-organized German advance up the Gudbrandsdal Valley, and the results are brutal. A British brigade goes from roughly 1,500 men to 300 in 4 days. America loses its first serviceman of the entire war. And by the end of the week, Hitler, satisfied enough with how Norway is going, orders his generals to start planning the actual date for the invasion of France.
I'm Justin. This episode also has one of the most remarkable retreats of the entire campaign, a British colonel who remembered a fishing trip from his childhood and used it to help save his entire battalion. A new, considerably harsher German administrator taking over Norway, and Batman's first solo comic hitting newsstands with the debut of the Joker and Catwoman. All the while, a British brigade is being cut into pieces in the Norwegian Valley. Let's get into it. On April 21st in Lillehammer, British troops of Brigadier Morgan's 148th Brigade have scarcely had time to settle into position when General Pellinger's German forces hit them. The Germans quickly outflanked the British line, forcing the whole position to collapse. That night, a German motorized machine gun battalion makes a daring drive straight through the retreating British and Norwegian forces and seizes Lillehammer outright. The following day, Morgan tries to reform a defensive line further north, but the Norwegian ski troops assigned to cover his flanks are simply too exhausted to do it. Small parties of German troops on skis work their way into the gaps, harassing the British rear and even managing to raid Morgan's own brigade headquarters.
The British fall back along the Loggan River to a bridge at the village of Tretton, which has to be held open long enough for everyone still on the far bank to cross. On April 23rd, the position at Tretton Gorge takes a heavy morning artillery barrage, an afternoon attack by German light tanks, and then a surprise assault by German mountain troops who worked around behind the line entirely. 3 German tanks charge straight through the center of the British defense. The troops west of the river are forced to withdraw in haste. The ones east of it are just simply cut off.
By the time the retreat finally stops, 45 miles further north, Morgan can count only 9 junior officers remaining, and roughly 300 men left out of a 2-battalion brigade group that started this campaign with about 1,500. The 148th Brigade, routed in its first major engagement of the war, effectively ceases to exist as a fighting force. Morgan sends what's left of it back to Åndalsnes for evacuation. It's one of the starkest single-unit collapses of the entire Norwegian campaign, and it happens to troops who, as we discussed last episode, were poorly equipped and only partially trained for this kind of fighting to begin with.
Not every story from this collapse is one of defeat, and one deserves a spotlight, as the Germans cut the road north of Steinkjer. With a captured bridge, a group of British troops east of the town find themselves completely cut off. Their senior officer, a Lieutenant Colonel H.B. Hibbert, happens to remember something useful from his own boyhood. He'd spent several childhood holidays fishing in these exact mountains, and he dimly recalls an old wooden bridge well to the east, far from where the Germans are watching. He sends a volunteer Norwegian guide out on skis to confirm it exists. The guide comes back. Yes, there is a bridge, about 6 miles away as the crow flies, though the actual route over mountain trails is considerably longer.
Hibbert loads his wounded onto sledges and marches his battalion out, single file, 3 yards apart, so that if one man slips on the ice, he won't take down the whole line. Guided largely by a childhood memory of a fishing trip, which is crazy. They cover roughly 82 miles in 67 hours through mountain terrain in winter, carrying their wounded the entire way, which is also crazy. And then they reach the new British position north of Namsos, without losing a single weapon or leaving a single straggler behind. In a week defined mostly by collapse and retreat, Hibbert's march stands out as proof of what disciplined, resourceful leadership could still accomplish, even when almost everything else about the campaign was going wrong.
April 21st also brings a death of note. United States Army Captain Robert Losey, an American military attaché to the Nordic countries, is killed while observing a German bombing raid on the railway junction at Donbass. He is 31 years old, an aeronautical meteorologist by training, present purely as an official observer rather than a combatant. The United States is still a neutral nation. Losey becomes, by the historical record, the first American military casualty of the entire Second World War, more than a year and a half before Pearl Harbor brings the United States into the war directly. The American minister to Sweden immediately dispatches a naval attaché to Norway to recover his remains. It's a quiet, easily overlooked death in the middle of a chaotic week, but it's a real historical marker. The war has already claimed an American life long before America has any intention of fighting it.
Further north, near Narvik, the Battle of Gratangen begins on April 23rd. Norwegian troops of the 6th Brigade attack German mountain positions and briefly recapture the village of, sorry for my pronunciation, Gratangsbatten. It's a real, if only temporary success, proof that Norwegian forces, given the right terrain and the right moment, can still push German troops backward. But the Germans counterattack, and by April 25th, the battle ends in a clear German victory, with the Norwegian forces pushed back to roughly where they started.
Meanwhile, south of Donbass, the British 15th Brigade, 3 battalions of regular army troops, considerably better trained than the territorial units we've been following, with real combat experience from Palestine, marches forward to relieve what's left of the shattered 148th Brigade. They make contacts with Pellinger's advancing Germans in the village of Kvam, roughly 35 miles south of Donbass. The brigade's 5 French-made 25mm Hotchkiss anti-tank guns managed to stop the first German rush cold, knocking out 2 tanks outright. But the Germans begin working around the British left flank, and by nightfall, the brigade has to reorganize its line, abandoning 2 of those same anti-tank guns in the process. It's a partial success. Real resistance, real German losses, inside what is overall still a fighting retreat.
On April 24th in Oslo, we told you 2 episodes ago about the Administrative Council of 7 Norwegian officials that replaced Quisling after his brief and disastrous week as the self-declared Prime Minister. This week, Germany decides that arrangement still isn't enough. Hitler appoints Josef Terboven, a hardline, notably ruthless Nazi party Gauleiter from the German industrial city of Essen as Reichskommissar for the occupied Norwegian territories, where the Administrative Council was at least nominally Norwegian and at least theoretically trying to work with King Haakon's government. Terboven represents something much less accommodating. Direct German civilian rule backed by the full authority of the Reich, with no further pretense of Norwegian self-governance. It's the clearest signal yet that Germany intends to run Norway as an occupied territory, and not as some kind of protected partner like Denmark.
In the air, this week brings both a tactical success and a preview of its limits. On April 24th, 18 Gladiator biplanes of 263 Squadron RAF successfully land on the frozen surface of Lake Les Skogsvannet, which becomes their improvised airfield to support the Allied forces around Aldadsnes. It's an actually difficult flying achievement in terrible weather, and the pilots immediately prove their worth, engaging German bombers and shooting several down in the days that follow. But the aircraft itself has no anti-aircraft defenses whatsoever, sitting exposed on open ice with nothing to protect the aircraft on the ground. By the 26th, a separate Gladiator detachment operating from Setsnesmudin, near Aldadsnes, shoots down a German bomber but runs completely out of fuel and ammunition by the end of the engagement. Britain's air support in Norway is working, but it's also thin, isolated, and entirely dependent on supply lines that the Luftwaffe controls in the skies above.
At sea, HMS Furious, the aircraft carrier that's been improvising this entire campaign since the opening days with its reduced air group, and then with battle damage from a previous attack that we mentioned last episode, finally has to call it quits and head home. A second turbine sheds blades this week, leaving her running on just 2 working engines. Admiral Forbes, the commander-in-chief of the home fleet, makes the call. Refuel the ship, then send her back home for proper repairs. She is replaced in the theater by HMS Ark Royal and HMS Glorious, also aircraft carriers, which arrived this week, carrying way more aircraft between them. 4 Fleet Arm air squadrons on Ark Royal alone, plus another 3, and an RAF squadron on Glorious. It's a huge reinforcement of British air power over Norway, and whether it arrives in time to change the campaign's overall trajectory is something we'll see.
April 23rd. In London, it's Budget Day. Chancellor of the Exchequer, Sir John Simon, announces the government is seeking an all-time record, £1.234 billion in revenue, to cover the cost of the war through March 1941. Income tax and surtax both rise. Duties go up on tobacco, beer, spirits, and matches. Postal and telephone charges increase. And Simon introduces an entirely new category to British taxation. He calls it a purchase tax, applied to most goods not already heavily taxed, though the government hasn't even finished working out exactly how it will operate. Simon frames the whole package as intended to curb war profiteering, and warns that once peace returns, the government will take, in his words, effective action against anyone found to have made colossal war fortunes from the conflict. It's the sound of a country settling in for a long war, whatever anyone in that chamber actually believes about how long it will last.
A few other threads from the home front and beyond. On April 23rd, the Norwegian Nobel Institute in Oslo is visited by a German officer who expresses interest in requisitioning the building. He's informed that it actually belongs to the Nobel Foundation in Stockholm and is therefore Swedish property and not Norwegian. The wartime disruption still makes the committee's normal work impossible regardless. There will be no Nobel Prizes awarded in most categories for 1940, 1941, or 1942, and no ceremony at all until a special one is finally held in New York in 1944. The same day, in Helsinki, which had been awarded the 1940 Summer Olympics after Tokyo withdrew due to its own war in China, formally forfeits them as well. Finland fought a brutal war and won a fragile peace this winter, and the Olympics it was supposed to host would become one more small casualty of that same conflict.
In Dublin, Ireland, a bomb explodes at Dublin Castle on April 25th, wounding 5 detectives. Prime Minister Eamon de la Vera personally inspects the damage afterwards. On a considerably brighter note, the Canadian province of Quebec grants women the right to vote this same day, the last Canadian province to do so, closing out a process that had taken decades elsewhere in the country. And a few grace notes. On April 24th, issue number 1 of Batman, as his own standalone comic book, hits newsstands in America, marking the first appearances of both the Joker and Catwoman, though she's simply called the Cat in this debut. On the 25th, the future actor Al Pacino is born in Manhattan, and the USS Wasp CV-7, a carrier that will go on to serve with distinction and be lost in the Pacific War still to come, is commissioned into the United States Navy.
So everything that has happened in this episode, though, is arguably second to what happens in Berlin on the night of April 26th. Encouraged by what he sees as improving news from Norway, Hitler holds an all-night session with his military advisors. At 3:30 in the morning, best decision-making time, he tells them that he hopes to launch Fall Gelb, or Case Yellow, which is the invasion of France, Belgium, and the Netherlands, sometime between May 1st and May 7th, less than a month away. This is the plan that we've been tracking since before Manstein's dinner with Hitler all the way back in February.
Given everything else happening this same week, British and German forces are still fighting each other directly in Norwegian valleys. A British brigade has just been reduced to a few hundred men. Terboven has only just taken over administration of a country that isn't even fully conquered yet. And In the middle of all of that, Hitler is already looking past Norway entirely, setting a large window for the offensive that will define the rest of his war's first year. The date will slip, it always does, as we've seen repeatedly with this particular invasion plan since the Mechelen incident back in January. But this is the week the countdown begins in earnest. Everything happening in Norway this week is, in a sense, already becoming background noise to what's coming next.
So to wrap up, the 148th Brigade collapses from about 1,500 men to roughly 300 in just 4 days of fighting through the Gudbrandsdal Valley, while Colonel Hibbert leads his own battalion 82 miles to safety, guided largely by a childhood memory of a fishing trip. America loses its first serviceman of the war while still a neutral nation, over a year and a half before Pearl Harbor. Terboven replaces the Administrative Council with direct, harsher German rule. British gladiators land on a frozen lake with no anti-aircraft protection at all and fight anyway. London announces record wartime taxation and a new purchase task. And, in Berlin, in the small hours of the morning, Hitler hopes to launch the invasion of France between May 1st and May 7th. Next episode, we'll see whether the front in Norway can hold together at all, and just how much longer that date in Berlin has left to survive contact with reality. Thanks for joining us for episode 33 of History Date Night. We'll see you next time.
See you then!